Hello everyone, this is Sonali Mangal and welcome to another episode of Learn, Educate, Discover. On this podcast, we invite people from different professions on each of our episodes and we ask them a range of questions to try and understand what their job is all about. The goal of this podcast is to try and educate our listeners about as many different kind of jobs as we can so that someone listening to the show can decide, does a certain job sound interesting to them? And if yes, how do they go about exploring it further? On today's show, we are going to be talking about product marketing management in tech. And this is a role that you can find in almost all medium to large sized companies. And as the name suggests, it involves thinking about how do you promote and sell your product to an audience. And of course, the nature of this role varies quite a bit from company to company, and we'll get more into that during our discussion. But suffice to say that almost all companies such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Dropbox, Box, Airbnb, etc., all of them have people working in this role. So it's a very interesting role to learn more about. So let me quickly introduce our guest on today's show then, who's going to help us understand this area in detail. His name is George Zheng. And George currently works as a product marketing manager with Facebook. Actually, let me correct that. He very recently moved into a product management role at Facebook, but until very recently, he was working as a product marketing manager for close to 2 years at Facebook. And he's been doing very well in this role. In fact, he went well above and beyond the typical things that someone does in this role, and that enabled him to do well and also transition fairly quickly to a different role. And of course, we'll talk more with George in terms of what are the kind of things that he did. But before Facebook also, George has done a variety of things and it's really quite interesting. So before Facebook, George started his own company called AirCare Labs. This was in the healthcare space. And not only did the company do very well, George was able to sell this company to Right Care Solutions about 2 years after its inception. So that was great. Before this, he's done a variety of things. So he's worked as a consultant for a while with McKinsey and Company. He worked at a hedge fund for a while. So he was with TPG Axon Capital in Hong Kong for some time. He's also worked in investment banking. So he was with Goldman Sachs for a while. And he has also worked in sales. He was the head of sales for Groupon in southern China for some time. So a very, very diverse background, and he did a lot of interesting things in all of these roles. And in terms of his educational background, George has a background in economics from Princeton University, and he also has an MBA from the Wharton School with a concentration in healthcare and technology. So as you'll see in today's show, George is going to be sharing a lot of great details in terms of what a role in product marketing management is all about and what helped George do really well in this role. And he'll also be sharing a number of insights which are helpful not only vis-a-vis product marketing management, but in terms of your career overall. So I really hope you find today's discussion helpful and interesting. And without further ado, let's welcome George to the show.
Hey, Sonali.
Hey, George. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's just packing before going to Mexico for a wedding, but otherwise doing really well.
Oh, wow. It's 10 p.m., right? When are you leaving for your wedding?
I'm leaving for my wedding. Oh, not my wedding.
No,
a wedding for a friend tomorrow morning, the 7 a.m. flight, but leaving for the airport probably around 5 to 6 a.m. or so.
Oh, my God. So this thing is going to take a while. You know that, right? Recording the podcast.
I do, and I am prepared to be as helpful as I can and push packing off as long as I can.
So you haven't packed yet either?
Have not packed yet.
I think you should just forget about sleeping tonight. Yeah.
That's okay.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and super excited to hear about what you did in your role as a product marketing manager. So I think a good place to start could be, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career path so far.
Sure. I mean, you did a very, very good summary. But I'd say that for me, for some people, I feel like they've figured out what they want to do in life early on. And for me, it was really a process of trial and error. So like you mentioned, I worked in finance, I worked in consulting, but I really found a good product market fit, if you will, of a role fit for me in this sort of sweet spot of entrepreneurship and technology. And I realized I really enjoyed building products, building organizations, and building teams. So my experiences at Groupon, at Facebook, and in the entrepreneur world very much fit squarely in that kind of space. And it's just what I love doing. And I've had a lot of fun doing it for the last few years.
No, I can see that. I mean, we met each other at Wharton. At that time, were you clear about this, this interest in technology and entrepreneurship? Because before then, your background was more traditional rather than non-traditional, right? So it's consulting, finance, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yes and no. So I knew that I wanted to move further from analyzing businesses and actually be closer to building businesses and building products. So that was a bit of a process that took many years for me to figure it out. So, for example, when I worked in investment banking, it was very much an analyst kind of job. Mm-hmm. And then when I went over to the investing side, I wanted to get closer to managements within big companies and really get a sense of how they thought about running the businesses. Mm-hmm. So TPG, as some of you may know, is not only a hedge fund, but also a private equity firm. Right. So I wanted to get a sense of both the private and the public investing sort of processes. And from that experience, I realized that moving to consulting was one step closer to running businesses and working with people. And for me, the real jump into technology and entrepreneurship came when me and this other guy named Howard, a good friend of mine, we actually ran Groupon in Southern China. And that was such a fun time. Howard's a really good friend, and we had an amazing run. And actually, the wedding I'm going to tomorrow is for Howard. Okay. Howard and his, I guess, fiance, wife to be, who we're all really good friends. Oh, okay. And that led me to realize that during business school, I really wanted to spend a lot of time kind of at this intersection of technology and entrepreneurship, building products, building teams, building organizations. So while I was a full-time student, I actually started a company called AirCare, mm-hmm. like you mentioned, in healthcare technology. And while I was a full-time student, I actually ran the company, did a full-time accelerator, and set the company up for success, for continuing success, I guess, by the time I graduated from business school. Did it for a year, then sold it. Backtrack a little bit. Another thing I did during business school was I interned at Facebook. So after selling AirCare, I went back to Facebook. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am right now.
And when you were interning at Facebook, was AirCare already there at that point?
So it was not. Okay. When I interned at Facebook, I had hacked on different side projects and business ideas, but I hadn't committed to any single one at that point in time. I was still working with different projects, different people, and it took a little bit longer after I interned at Facebook for me to figure that out.
Got it. Okay. So you joined Facebook after selling AirCare?
Yes.
Right. So tell us a little bit about what was your thought process at that time, specifically what attracted you to product marketing management?
Yeah. So it's really interesting being kind of in a technology company or in an entrepreneurial position, because personally what I really like is the intersection of both business and engineering or product. And not having been trained as an engineer in my education, when I was at Princeton undergrad, I got a degree in, like you mentioned, econ, finance, Chinese, East Asian studies. So it was a bunch of humanities stuff. All the coding and technology stuff that I did was self-taught. Like during business school, actually, I went and took engineering classes at Penn. I also did this thing where there's like this program, General Assembly, I think it was called, that had boot camps, literally like 1 day, 1 week type boot camps in coding, in R, and Python, PHP. I literally did every single one. So over the course of a year, I went up to New York probably dozens of times and took every single one of the weekend boot camps or evening boot camps they had. And then in addition to that, just started hacking on my own. So not having come from a traditional engineering background, but largely self-taught, means that whereas I feel very comfortable building my own websites, building web apps, I don't have as much of the engineering background to do very, very technical, say, back-end work.
Right.
So I found that being at the intersection of business, which leverages my entrepreneurial skills, but still being involved with product and engineering, which I enjoy, both product marketing and product management are very, very good for the intersection of these two disciplines.
Okay. So maybe you can describe for us a little bit what is product marketing?
Sure. Product marketing is actually different company to company. Why don't I describe it, what it's like at Facebook, and I believe there's some slight variations which I can talk to that I think exist at other companies.
Okay.
So product marketing at Facebook comprises of two broad pieces of work. One is inbound marketing. That's basically going out and figuring out what the market requirements for a product are. So for example, I work on ads. An inbound project or inbound piece of work would be going out and figuring out what advertisers really want, what advertisers really need to sell their products, right? Mm. And this is a piece of work that can oftentimes include market sizing, segmentation. It can include a lot of interviews with different advertisers to figure out what their true needs are, because sometimes they don't know what their needs are. Sometimes it's very much a discovery process that an inbound product marketing person has to figure out. And then when that piece of work is done, oftentimes the product marketing person will work with the product manager and with the engineering team to spec out exactly the requirements of the product. And when the product has been built, the second piece of a product marketing person's work, at least at Facebook, is called the outbound process. And that's taking the product, going out and making sure that product is adopted as widely as possible so that it's successful. No matter how well you build a product, if people don't use it, it's not having impact. Right. So the outbound piece is making sure that the product is used and has impact in whatever way it was designed to have.
Got it. Okay. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. So the inbound process at a very, very high level, the inbound piece is basically thinking about or figuring out what are the requirements that you need to build in your product through different ways, right? So it may not be very obvious to everyone. Like, why were you speaking with advertisers?
Yeah. So let me first clarify by saying the things I described, I guess, are more of the typical ways of doing inbound, right? And I think in order to do anything, not only product marketing, but anything successfully, you have to think about not only what are the typical ways of doing it, but the atypical ways of doing it. So this is like step one. There's also step two of the inbound sort of work that you can do as well. But to answer your question directly in terms of why speaking with advertisers is there's this whole process called customer development, which is a discipline within the broader entrepreneurship circles. If you Google this, you'll find a lot of different examples of what this actually means. But in a nutshell, it means interviewing people and asking questions to tease out their true need that they themselves may not know. So the perfect example of this is the old example people will talk about Henry Ford saying, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have just said a faster horse.
Right.
Right. And truly what they wanted is they wanted a faster, easier, more efficient way of getting from point A to point B. It didn't have to be a horse, but if you ask people that question, they most likely only work in the existing paradigms that they've been taught and experiences they've had before. So truly good inbound work identifies the problem and may come up with solutions that are outside the paradigms that people have used before. Gotcha. And that's the point of interviews. It's to truly identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and not only the existing ways of solving it, but perhaps entirely new, different ways of solving it as well.
Got it. So I would love an example of what you might have figured out, like what wasn't an immediately obvious need of advertisers. But just one thing I would like to clarify, and maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but the reason, so advertisers were your customers, right?
Yes.
That's why you were speaking with advertisers, because you owned like an ad product.
Yes. So the products I worked on at Facebook and I continue to work on are ads related products. Okay. So if you think about it, they are actually products that advertisers use and consumers see. So the immediate users of the product are advertisers, but the consumers of the final ad products are actually consumers.
Right, of course. Okay. So yeah, I think it'll be very helpful if you can share an example of the kind of things you may have uncovered in your interviews with these advertisers, which were then very insightful and led to something very different in the product.
Yeah. So let me give you an example. I will have to be a bit general here because some of the stuff is still private information. But one of the things I discovered in some of my conversations with advertisers is that having good creatives was a big, big problem, right? So what that means is the pictures and the texts and the descriptions for an ad have a very, very large effect on the actual return on investment of that ad. And prior to this, the way that people actually really improve their creative was a very manual process of talking to agencies or maybe using professionals to help you improve the quality of your picture.
Right.
So one of the things I realized is that there's probably a way we can productize this, or we can very thoughtfully use machines to figure out which creatives are good and which creatives are bad, and use that to systematically improve the quality of creatives.
I see. Okay.
So that led to a whole sort of line of thinking and products that actually automated parts of these processes.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's really smart. Okay. And you mentioned one very interesting point, which is that in any job, actually, not just in product marketing management, there's the typical way of doing things, and then there's the atypical way of doing things. So within the inbound piece, can you talk a little bit about what were the typical things which you can see almost every product marketing manager doing? And then what was the atypical thing that you did? I'm guessing it's the advertiser interviews, but if there was anything else also.
Yeah. Let me just give you a simple example of this. A typical way of doing an inbound piece of work would involve maybe market sizing. So an analysis using things like market research. It would involve reading research reports. It would involve speaking with advertisers. It would involve customer segmentation, which is segmenting the types of advertisers that would use your product based on some kind of external third-party research. And that's all good and I think important. But one of the models I have in my head is, in order to obtain unusual results, you either have to do unusual things or the usual things in an unusual way. Mm-hmm. I know that's kind of wordy, but like if you think about the inverse of what I just said, it's in order to obtain usual results, you do the usual things in the usual way. And anytime I or something I've seen happen has just accepted the usual way of doing things for a very long time, it makes me question whether we're really, really being thoughtful and innovative.
Right.
So I constantly push myself to sort of break that paradigm when I catch myself in that pattern. And one example of doing this is, for some of the products I worked on, I actually went out and found entrepreneurs who are building products in that space, or different people who built different versions of that product, sat them down, really, really understood how they've built their companies and their products in the past, recruited engineers and product managers and other folks who've been knee deep in the technical aspects of the product, invited them in for lunch with our teams, and we really, really went at it from a technical perspective. And I feel that by doing that, we were able to actually foresee a bunch of problems of related products that have launched either in the market or related startups, and use that as a way to see 6 months, 1 year, 2 years ahead, and make sure that we don't work on a product or work on a technical problem that has issues other people have already encountered before.
Right. Okay. That's really smart. And this was something which you did completely on your own. Like you were the one product marketing manager who's like, hey, let me figure out the other startups who are in this space and let's invite them over for lunch and we'll learn from them.
Yeah. I basically went through my network. I went through Wharton, Princeton alum. I went through my entrepreneurial network from when I was an entrepreneur. I pinged random people, basically cold on LinkedIn. So I used just a bunch of different other methods.
Very cool. Okay. And this is not something which you would find most PMMs doing as such?
I don't think at least in my time at Facebook, I didn't really hear of people systematically doing this.
Okay. Very cool. Okay. And then let's go down on the outbound side then. So on the outbound side, you said that basically it's once the product is ready, it's all about figuring out how to get it in the most hands as possible, customer hands as possible. So what are the kind of things that you would work on? And I think over here, again, it'll be helpful if you can talk about the typical and the atypical things. Sure.
So typical outbound things include preparing blogs, preparing messaging, which is like talking points for, say, sales and other people who would sell the products, right? And I think there's a very, very standard process. Facebook and I believe many other companies have templates. And what many folks end up doing is just filling out those templates with information about the value proposition of the product, about who it's built for, about why you would use it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's typically the outbound process. Now, I know I mentioned that you don't just want to do the usual thing the usual way. You want to think about unusual things you can do, as well as unusual ways you can do the usual things to obtain unusually good results. And I truly believe that's an important part of really, really doing outstanding work. And in this example of like outbound, the things I did is I work on ads products, but ads products for developers. So the team I work with at Facebook most closely is the ads API, our ads product platform. So They're the teams that build APIs upon which, tools and buying tools for Facebook's ad products are built. And they're responsible for basically ad buying on Facebook, more or less. Mm-hmm. So because many of our products have to be used by developers, and you can't just use pure blogs and messaging for sales, things I've done include I helped create an accelerator modeled off of like Y Combinator, Techstars. My startup went through an accelerator called Dream It Health as well. So I created one just for ads developers at Facebook, and then worked with a cross-functional team to really create this accelerator that helped a lot of developers and onboarded them in a way where they could be successful. Another thing I did is I worked with one of our internal teams called the solution engineering team to actually create a marketing developer website, a website that includes things like sample codes or an open source version of an app that uses the marketing APIs, as well as host the marketing API accelerator program as well. So those are atypical things that I believe I haven't really heard of other sort of folks in product marketing do before.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So can you talk a little bit more about the accelerator? So maybe you can first just like quick 1 or 2 lines on what is an accelerator, and then what did it mean in the context of what you were doing for developers? Yeah.
Sure. So Y Combinator, YC, Techstars, Dream It, they're basically programs or accelerators that have the motive of accelerating growth or progress in a startup. So the one that went through in YC and Techstars typically have a structure of, they give you some money, say $50,000 or $100,000. They take an equity ownership of your company, maybe like 8%. And over the course of, say, a few months, 2, 3, 4 months, they will provide you with mentorship, office space, connections. And the whole goal is you have a lot of progress done in a very short amount of time. Maybe you do 1 to 2 years worth of work in 3 to 4 months. At the end of the accelerator, typically you have a demo day where you pitch VCs for funding, and then, hopefully you get funding for your startup and you go on your merry way to build your company. Now, we had a bit of a model on the mobile app side because there's also a accelerator type program called FB Start for mobile apps at Facebook, but there's nothing on it like it for ads. So I combined what I saw with FB Start as well as my experience at Dream It to basically help create something where ads developers could apply to an accelerator and enter 1 of 3 tracks, learn, build, or grow, and receive a combination of ad credits. They received mentorship. They received technical support to build their products, and they received marketing help. Nice. And I want to, by the way, clarify that by no means was I the only person that sort of was responsible for creating either the accelerator or the marketing developer website. Yeah. To get anything done, you need a really strong cross-functional group of people from marketing, from engineering, from partnerships, and these people were critical to the creation of both of these programs. Right. But what was really cool was having been a part of the genesis and the creation of the idea was really fascinating from a product marketing perspective.
This is amazing. So I was going to ask you what was in it for the developers, but it sounds like there were clear incentives that the developers received. And plus they got to work with the Facebook team for a while.
Yep. So there were 3 tracks. Learn was really to learn how to use the APIs. It included things like AMAs modeled after Reddit's AMAs, Ask Me Anythings, where people from our solution engineering and partnership team joined a Facebook group and answered questions from developers for like an hour on a regular basis. It included ad credits. It included access to groups where they could ask Facebook personnel questions. The build track enabled people to have one-on-one engineering support with Facebook people. And the grow track enabled them to get marketing support to really grow their businesses.
I think one thing which I'm curious about is like all of these things, right? Like whether it's sitting down with startups and inviting them for lunch or setting up an accelerator. I mean, these sound like very resource intensive activities. So how did you go about convincing people that this was a worthwhile investment?
Yeah, this is like a really interesting question because there's like a bunch of different ways you can do it. And I think for each one of these, I did them in slightly different ways. So for reaching out to the entrepreneurs, like one of the things I strongly believe in is that my basic formula is this. I would try to do 100 units of work in 50 units of time. So something that would take, say, 100 hours, I would try to find ways to do it in 50 units of time. And then I would spend maybe 10, 15 units of time making it really good. And I would spend the additional remaining 35 to 40 units of time coming up with new ways to move the ball forward in unexpected ways. So, for example, reaching out to these entrepreneurs were the culmination of, I came up with a bunch of hacks, each of which is like a 1% to 2% improvement in productivity. But once you layered on 50 or 100 of them, allowed you to be, say, twice or 3 times as productive as the average person. And then that opens up a lot of time to experiment with different ideas. And it's during this experimentation time that I would go out to do things like reach out through my network and speak to entrepreneurs, or set up lunch with our engineering team and with people who built interesting products before. So that hopefully answers your first question of the first piece of it. And then the second piece of it for the accelerator, that was based on experiences I've had before or reading I've done before, combined with, again, having some additional experimentation time I created for myself. Mm-hmm. And after getting progress or traction with something like the accelerated idea, what I found is it becomes easier and easier for people to get on board of an idea that has legs, right? I see. Okay. I think there's some kind of quote that victory has 1,000 fathers and failures an orphan. What I found is that when you're able to come up with hopefully a good idea and get some initial traction on it, it becomes easier and easier to sell it to other people. Right. Okay. And then the more and more people you get on board of a project, the further you can take it. There's also another saying that I believe is, go fast, go long, go far, go together.
Yeah, no, right? I mean, this is great. Yeah. So basically what you're saying is it's not like you just put together a bunch of slides on just an idea and tried to convince people. You actually started working on the idea, developed it to some extent, got people on board. And once others saw that traction, that's how you slowly sort of built it out and got it.
Exactly. Okay. Because I don't think you can ever get things taken really far, especially at a bigger company, without buy-in support from the cross-functional partners. Like I said before, I want to emphasize that all these things that happened because other people were very supportive and helped a lot, right? By no means could I claim like full credit for any of these sort of initiatives. There's a lot of hard work done by a lot of good people to really make these things happen.
Right. And one thing which I'm just curious about, can you share an example of a productivity hack which allowed you to create all this time for experimentation?
I can give you 5 or 6, and you can sort of see how they stack on each other, right? One, for example, is during my time in investment banking and consulting, I literally learned the shortcuts for every single Office product, for literally every single Windows shortcut key I know. Okay. So what I found is that dramatically improved my speed. For example, when I used to do PowerPoints, at McKinsey, before learning the shortcut keys, it might have taken me like 5 hours to do a PowerPoint. Yeah. But after learning all the shortcut keys, it might have taken me 2 hours. Right. Okay. Right. So it more than doubled my productivity. Right. Another example is, I use both a PC and a Mac. I use PC for creation of PowerPoints. I use a PC for Excel. I use a PC for Outlook for email. But then I use a Mac for all my coding. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Another example is I have macros that automate processes for me in Excel and PowerPoint. I set up a cascading series of rules that automatically categorize all of my email. So I spend very little time needing to sort of organize my email, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can sort of see how each one of these some of them might be very small. Yeah. Some of them might be very big. But when they stack on top of each other, they can make you dramatically more productive. Yeah, yeah. So, the thing which is really coming out, and that's what you said yourself, is that you're someone who believes in doing like not just the usual things, but the unusual things to really get the unusual results. So this kind of thinking, is this something that you sort of always had, or did you develop it? Yeah, I think a little bit of both. What's been interesting to me is that it took me a while to realize that personally, I think a very important thing for a person is to really understand yourself very well. And for me, I think I'm a very entrepreneurial person. But I didn't know that for the first, 20 years of my life. I've always done very entrepreneurial things. Like during college, I Like, I was always looking for ways to hack my classes. I started a investment fund during college. During business school, I hacked my classes too. I don't know if you know this when we were in school, Sonali, but I did all the work for my entire semester's worth of classes the first week. And then I was working on startups, and I was traveling to different countries, and I was having fun with friends.
How did you finish the work of an entire semester in 1 week?
Oh, come on, Sonali. You and I both know that plenty of people crammed the entire semester's worth of material in the week before finals.
That's true. No, I did that. But like, you did that in the beginning of the semester?
I just did that at the beginning. I just time shifted to the beginning.
All right. Okay. Oh, wait, we don't want to digress too much. But no, this is very interesting. Okay. So you just you realized that, I mean, I'm guessing at some point in time, you sort of realized that you always had this sort of entrepreneurial spirit in you.
Yeah. And it took me a while to realize both that I had it and that it may be different from how other people think. I think personally, this is where knowing yourself really comes in, really matters. Like, I realized that the way my mind works is I try to hack everything. Like, I love efficiency hacks. I like growth hacks. I always sort of try to think of like innovative ways of solving problems. And that's always been part of who I am. Yeah. And I just try to utilize my natural tendencies to hopefully great effect in my work.
All right, so let's get back to product marketing. So,
sure.
Can you maybe share an example of a project? So, I mean, you shared a couple of examples, but I would love to sort of understand a project from beginning to end. How does it start? And then the different stages and the kind of activities you would engage in and the other roles that you would interface with throughout this project.
Sure. Again, I'm going to have to be a bit general here. I'm not dodging the question because some of the stuff that I worked on, some of it has launched, but some of it's still in progress.
Right.
So as an example, let's say as product marketing, I work with the product team and we figure out a list of stuff that we want to build for the next half, right? Let's say I work with product management, engineering, and data science, and design and research, and there's a list of the products that need to be built in the next half. Mm-hmm. What typically happens is, you start off with just going out and I would read a lot of research. I think the easiest way to gain more information is to read, the most self-sufficient way. So I would read a lot of research and really understand the problem in the space really well. Mm-hmm. And after I feel like I have a good handle of the space and the problem, I would go and talk to as many people as I can. So both within Facebook as well as external to Facebook. Let's say I worked on a product related to lead generation, I would talk to the teams that worked on similar kind of products, really understand the problem really well as how products have been built to sort of serve that space in the past. Then what I would do is I would go external. I have like a pretty broad entrepreneurial network, having been an entrepreneur before. I'll talk to my friends who solved that problem before or entrepreneurs I've met or alumni from Wharton or Princeton. Then after finishing the talking to people phase, I'll go through this process of estimating the market size using both the data I've collected as well as the anecdotal insights. I will try to segment the users of the product to really get a sense of who would use this, why are they using it. Again, an input into the market sizing in terms of how much, say, money I think that this product could generate, again, from that side. Mm-hmm. And then based on that, I would work with the team on putting together a plan of how to proceed forward with the product. There would be things along the ways of like reviews with leadership, both in terms of the opportunity, in terms of how we go about building the product, and hopefully we'll culminate into this process of getting buy-in and agreement from product marketing, from product management, from engineering, from data science, from design, from research to actually build the product. And again, for this process, it's not just product marketing, right? Product management is intimately involved. Usually engineering is intimately involved. For some of the data science and analytics, the data science team will be involved too. And it's just a very, very strong cross-functional group of people who are pushing this forward.
Right. Okay.
For the products I work on, there's two additional teams that matter a lot. And one is like partnerships, because a lot of the external developers that build on our APIs or ads APIs are actually external partners. And then solution engineering, which is oftentimes the sales-facing engineering team, which has a lot of anecdotal feedback in terms of advertisers and developers who are using our products.
Got it. Okay.
So those two groups would be involved too. And then after we put together essentially both the marketing requirements and the product requirements, we would get sign-in from leadership in terms of both the value of this product as well as like how we go about building it. And then we go through maybe a process of, depending on the product, maybe a couple weeks, a couple months of actually building the product. And then when the product is during the building phase, I would iterate on a lot of this sort of collecting feedback, talking to people, maybe alpha or beta testing of products with real customers or developers or advertisers to sort of see their reactions. And then when we have something pretty good, we'll start crafting a go-to-market plan of exactly how we'll go about getting adoption, right? So do you go through existing sales teams? Do you go through the SMB account managers? Do you want to come up with something creative like an accelerator for developers? There's a very specific set of different steps or tools you would take. I think for most ad products, it's really relying on sales to drive adoption. Right. And then at that point in time, after putting together this very comprehensive document we call the MPD, or master product document, we would actually go through almost a roadshow of training and educating people in sales or the SMB account managers or whoever the people who are key stakeholders who need to be bought in to get adopted. We'd educate them on the product and its value. And after that process, launch the product and really aim to get as much adoption as we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you were to think about your time end to end throughout this project, how would you split your time amongst various activities? And by activities, I mean like time spent on research and then time spent talking to customers, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So this is like something I found actually varies dramatically, PMM to PMM, or product marketing manager, product marketing manager. I've noticed two trends. There tends to be more product-focused product marketing managers and more marketing-focused product marketing managers. And there's no wrong or right way to do the job. The product-focused product marketing managers tend to focus more on the product, as you might expect. They tend to focus more on the inbound piece. And the marketing product marketing managers tend to focus more on the outbound or the marketing piece. Again, there's no wrong or right way to do the job. But what I think matters more than even your own preferences is the phase of the product and type of product. For example, the beginning of the product is basically all inbound, right? It's really doing the market sizing segmentation, doing the interviews with people, right? At that point in time, maybe like analysis would be 30% of your day. Right. Maybe discussions with different people would be 40% of your day. And the additional 30% are ongoing meetings you have with all your close partner teams, right? But let's say that you finish the building process and you're about to launch the product. Maybe then at that point in time, it's 30% of your day not spent on analysis, but really on writing the master product document, the blog posts, the educational materials. Maybe, 30-40% of your day is spent talking to sales. And then the 30% remaining part of your day is spent on the ongoing cross-functional meetings. Mm-hmm. So your time has actually shifted dramatically depending on what phase of the product you're in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And are there any KPIs that are used to measure the success of a product marketing manager?
I think this varies dramatically product to product and group to group and product marketing manager, product marketing manager. The KPIs that matter for a PMM is the KPIs of your product. So, for example, for an ad product, it's oftentimes revenue, it's adoption, as in like what percentage of advertisers use your product, things like that. Okay. But there's no absolute value. It's not like you need 30% adoption to be successful, right? Like a product like an interface product that's rolled out to everyone has a higher bar for adoption than, say, a very niche developer-focused ad product, let's say.
Right. But you would own these metrics with your product manager and your engineers, everyone combined.
So you may, as a PMM, have slightly different variations of that metric than your PM or the engineers, but the overall metric should be more or less the same.
Okay. I see. All right. So I think in one way or the other, you've basically described very well the overall area as well as what your day-to-day looks like. I mean, it sounds like if I were to run into you on a typical day, for the most part, you'll either be talking to people, either your counterparts within Facebook or customers, or you're spending time doing research and analysis, that sort of thing.
Yep. Also, time I'd say preparing like educational materials, blog posts, and documentation as well.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, would you describe this job as like in terms of working hours? What is that like?
I think it's very flexible. Again, I think it depends on the company and your particular product and your relationship with your team and manager. Personally, I found I had an amazing manager and I found absolute flexibility with my time. I can come in literally whenever I want. I can leave whenever I want. And as long as the work was good and I had impact, I was given a lot of freedom. Personally, I am more of an early bird. So I would probably come in like sometime between 7 and 8, typically.
Oh, wow.
And I would leave maybe, I don't know, 7-ish or so on average.
I see. Okay. Yeah. At a tech company, I'm guessing you were pretty much by yourself at 7 a.m. I mean, not a lot of people come in at that time.
Yeah, I would say the average, at least at Facebook, was 9 to 10 is when people came in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. But because you were doing all of these atypical things that you described, you may have been spending more time at work than maybe some of the other PMMs.
Oh, definitely. In addition to doing that, I was like also like reading through technical documentation, like building things on our APIs for fun, going to the gym, learning how to play bridge, like a lot of other stuff as well.
Taking advantage of a large company like Facebook. Yeah.
Exactly.
So in your opinion, what do you think are the most interesting aspects of working as a product marketing manager?
I'd say it's being able to be at the intersection of business and engineering is fascinating. I think being able to be strategic, the difference between a product marketing manager and product manager oftentimes is product marketing manager has a higher percentage of their time that's on strategic and cross-functional, whereas a product manager has a higher percentage of their time on like the nitty-gritty of engineering and execution.
I see. That's interesting. Okay.
And that's a meaningful difference.
That's a very good point. So, I did want to ask you, and maybe this is a good time, which is that what made you switch from product marketing management to product management?
Yeah. I think I mentioned that I've noticed that personally, I've been more of a product person in the PMM world. And my own conclusion was one of the biggest ways I could have impact is a magnified impact through the product, right? For example, Facebook has a user count of like whatever the latest count is, 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion people.
Yeah.
And you can do one or two things in terms of, you can speak to one or two people. You can educate one or two people, but you can influence literally hundreds of millions or billions of people through product. And I've always found that to be the most interesting and the most magnified way of having impact in the world.
Okay. All right. No, because I think I've seen a lot of product marketing managers make that switch. So maybe we'll do another episode with you just on how to make that transition. But coming back to product marketing, what do you think are the challenging aspects of this role?
I think you have to be a person that really enjoys people. Like a very large percentage of the time is spent interacting with people, as you probably have noticed by now. Mm-hmm. I think also what you'll see in any company is that there are natural tensions that should be set up in a company to have a healthy dynamic. For example, there should be a natural healthy tension between, say, engineering and legal, product and legal, right? Product should, in many different ways, push the boundaries of what's being built in a company. And legal should, in many cases, be the brakes to make sure that we're reducing the risk we expose ourselves to.
Right.
A healthy sort of relationship includes one where there's tension between the two different groups. And that's normal, that's okay. So being able to enjoy people and also work through people, oftentimes when there's conflicting motives, is a very, very critical part of the job. And if you don't enjoy people and don't enjoy working through these issues with people and don't have a bias for positive intent, it can be actually pretty difficult to do that.
That's a great point. Okay. And enjoying working with people is different from being an extrovert.
Yes. So, I mean, extrovert is the typical definition is getting energy from people, right? But you can enjoy you can enjoy working with people and still need time to watch TV or read books every day on your own. And that's okay.
Are there any aspects of this job that you just do not like?
I really enjoyed my work as a PMM and as a PM. I think maybe for me, the most tedious part of the job was more of the writing blog posts, et cetera, et cetera.
I knew
right?
you were going to say that. Yeah, okay. Now go
Which
ahead.
is fine. I mean, it had to be done. And, it was cool writing blog posts and being able to publish a blog post to a lot of people. But I always felt the most skilled way of having impact is still on product and engineering.
Yeah. So can you share, did you face any stressful situations in this job or tough situations?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely some of the natural tensions I mentioned are normal. And they definitely happen because different groups are incentivized differently, right? But one of my mentors said something interesting to me because at this point, many people may say, yes, one of the most annoying things about working in a company are politics. But one of my directors at my company said, anytime you see the word politics, recognize it's probably misaligned incentives or misaligned communication. And when I sort of take things through that lens, it really pops up to me that a lot of the things that most people would describe as politics are truly misaligned incentives or misaligned communications.
That's actually a very nice way of thinking about it. It does put a different perspective to things. Yeah. So can you share maybe an example of a kind of sort of misaligned incentives you might have run into? You don't have to share a lot of specifics.
Sure. I mean, for example, something I've seen in many different companies before, two teams may be incentivized for revenue, let's say, right? And there's only so much revenue to be had. So those two teams may be set against each other, right? And that might just be misaligned incentives. Maybe the metric or the KPI you use to measure those two teams shouldn't be their